The wind came first. It dragged its dry fingers across the parched earth, hissing between brittle fence posts and lifting little whirlwinds of dust that danced through the hollow streets of Bitter Creek. The town didn't stir much anymore, not since the mine dried up, not since the railroad decided to pass it by. A church bell still rang on Sundays, but it didn't echo the way it used to. It just hung there, soft and hollow, like a memory of a song nobody sings anymore. Clara Mayfield stood outside her barn, hand pressed to the warm wood of the door, eyes narrowed against the rising wind. The sky was wide and pale, as though God himself had lost the color for it. Her lips were cracked, her dress was worn. She looked out at her land and saw more brown than green, more sag than strength, and still she stayed. Behind her, the sound of hammering echoed from the side of the chicken coop. Ellie, her oldest, was trying to patch a broken panel with hands too small for the hammer she insisted on using. June, younger by 3 years, sat nearby plucking dead feathers from the ground, arranging them into a crooked star on the dirt. They should have been in school, but the schoolhouse had closed down 2 springs ago when the teacher moved east. Clara taught them what she could: math with a stick in the sand, scripture at night, and everything else in between through sheer living. The cattle had thinned again. She was down to 3 now, old bulls that wouldn't sell for much but still ate like kings. One of them was coughing blood that morning. Clara didn't cry. She just took a deep breath and wiped her hands on her apron. By noon, she hitched the old wagon and rode into town. The livestock auction was a sorry affair. Dozen or so folks sitting half asleep in a rickety pen of sun-bleached benches, waiting for deals to roll by. Most of the cattle were scrawny, their owners thinner still. Clara pulled up quietly, led her last healthy bull to the pen, and signed her name with the same pen she'd used to sign her marriage certificate 12 years ago. Carl Dobbin stood nearby, fat and sweating through his vest despite the wind. He ran the town's only bank and never smiled unless it cost someone else something. Clara knew his kind. He'd once offered to take the land off her hands and throw in a little extra to help with the girls. She had slammed her door on him, and he'd smiled even wider. Now he looked at her bull like it was half dead already. $2 a pound, he said. Clara blinked. That's half what he's worth. Carl shrugged, chewing on a toothpick like it held flavor. World's not what it was, Clara. Neither is your bull. She turned away, jaw clenched. She didn't argue. She didn't have the time to lose another deal. That's when she saw him. Leaning against the fence at the far end of the corral, tall enough to look over it without effort, stood a man built like a stone wall, and just as quiet. He wore a black duster, the hem dirt-worn and frayed. His hat was pulled low, but not enough to hide the line of his jaw or the scars along the side of his neck. His horse waited behind him, a dark roan with eyes like dusk. He didn't bid, didn't speak, he just watched. Clara felt something twist in her stomach, not fear, not attraction either, something else. A stillness maybe, the kind that comes right before the rain. She took the money from Dobbins. It wasn't enough, not even close. But it bought her time, and time was the only thing she'd ever been able to stretch past the breaking point. The ride home was quiet. June fell asleep in the wagon bed, and Ellie sat beside her, staring at the horizon like it held secrets too big for her age. Clara said nothing. Her mind was loud enough. She reached the ranch, just as the sun began to dip behind the hills. The wind had died down. The barn doors creaked in the silence, and the scent of hay mixed with sweat lingered like memory. Then came the knock. Not loud, not rushed, just firm enough to stop her breath mid-chest. She opened the door and saw the man from the fence. He stood tall, hat in hand now, eyes steady but unreadable. "Name's Bo Garrison," he said. She didn't invite him in. He waited a beat, then nodded to the land behind her. Big place to run with just 2 hands and a pair of little ones. Clara crossed her arms. "We get by." "Doesn't look like it." She narrowed her eyes. "You come here just to insult my home?" Bo's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "No, ma'am." He looked down, then back at her. His voice dropped lower. sincere. Not desperate, but something close. "I need a wife," he said, "and you need a son." Clara stared at him. The silence grew thick between them. Bo continued, calmly. "I got land up north. Too much for one man. No family, no legacy. Nothing but fences, and grass, and silence. I heard about you from the feed merchant. Said you were stubborn as sin, and meaner than a bull in June." Clara didn't blink. He nodded. Seemed like a fair match. "I have daughters, and I don't need to replace your husband." The wind returned, brushing past her skirts. The porch creaked. Somewhere behind her, Ellie opened the door just a crack and peeked out. "I'm not looking for a savior," Clara said flatly. Bo nodded once. "Good. I'm not holy." She hesitated, then stepped aside. "You want coffee?" He smiled for the first time, just barely. "I wouldn't mind." They sat on the porch, mugs in hand, the sun melting behind the hills. Bo didn't speak much, and Clara didn't press. The girls stayed inside, quiet but watchful. She studied his hands, scarred, weather-worn. A man who worked, a man who bled. "What do you want, really?" she asked. He took a slow sip. A name passed down, a roof with voices in it, someone to wake up for. She looked down into her cup. It was chipped and empty. He stood to leave but didn't walk away yet. "I'll be in town for 3 days," he said. "After that, I ride back north." She nodded, still not looking at him. "I won't ask again," he said softly. "I just said what needed saying." Then he tipped his hat and stepped off the porch. As he disappeared into the dusk, Clara stared out over her land, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel entirely alone. The morning after Bo Garrison rode away from the porch, Clara Mayfield found herself standing by the stove longer than necessary. One hand resting lightly on the iron handle of the kettle. The water had already come to a boil, but she hadn't moved. The room was quiet except for the ticking clock above the door and the soft murmur of her daughters whispering on the stairwell. They thought she didn't hear them. She heard everything. Clara wasn't a woman given to foolish thoughts. She lived in the hard lines between need and duty, between soil and sky. But the memory of Bo's voice, steady, grounded and honest, kept looping in her mind like the distant call of cattle at dusk. She poured the hot water slowly into the pot, set the cups, and sat by the window, watching dust rise from the fields. The sun had barely lifted its head from the horizon, and already the heat pressed against the panes like breath on glass. 2 days passed without another sign of him. Clara didn't ask around town. She didn't have to. She could feel it, that quiet tension in the wind, like a question hanging in the air. Bo Garrison was still in Bitter Creek, and he hadn't taken back a word of what he'd said. On the 3rd day, Clara was out behind the barn, dragging a sack of feed toward the trough, when she heard the slow crunch of hooves on gravel. She turned without alarm. He was there, reins loose in his hand, sitting easy on the saddle like the horse was part of him. His duster flapped slightly in the wind. He didn't smile. He didn't tip his hat. He just dismounted and walked toward her like he belonged there. "I said 3 days," he murmured. Clara wiped her brow with the back of her sleeve and straightened. "I didn't say yes. I didn't hear no either." They stood there, 5 feet apart, surrounded by the sound of flies and the low groan of thirsty wood. June peeked from behind the rain barrel, barefoot and silent. Ellie stood in the doorway with a hammer in her hand. Bo turned his head toward the fields. "I can fix that fence," he said, nodding at the slanting posts along the north boundary. "Won't cost you anything but time." Clara's jaw worked for a moment, but then she nodded once. "Hammer's in the shed." He didn't wait for a second offer. By sundown, Bo had reset 20 posts, patched 3 rails, and dug out a snake nest that had taken up under the fence line. He didn't ask for food, didn't ask for thanks. When the light finally faded from the hills, he took off his gloves and laid them on the porch rail. "I'll be back tomorrow." And he was, The rhythm settled without permission. Bo arrived each morning before dawn and left just after sundown. Some nights, Clara let him wash up from the pump behind the barn. Other nights, he sat on the porch, saying nothing, drinking the coffee she never admitted was meant for him. The girls watched from the corners of rooms and fence posts. Ellie warmed faster. She asked questions, rode beside him once when he took the mule to the dry creek. June stayed silent longer, but began leaving small offerings: a shiny rock on the rail, a flower tucked into the handle of his saddlebag. Bo didn't intrude. He didn't sleep in the house. He made a pallet in the hayloft, and when Clara asked why, he just shrugged. "Seems right," he said. The days thickened with summer heat, and Clara found herself saying less, but feeling more. Bo's presence was like shade, unspoken relief, always there when needed. He repaired the corral, patched the roof of the chicken coop, and somehow found time to teach Ellie how to swing a lasso without breaking her wrist. Carl Dobbins came back on a Wednesday, riding up in a polished buggy like he was visiting royalty. Clara was in the garden when he arrived. She wiped her hands on her apron and met him at the gate. Carl took off his hat and gave her a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Still trying to make something grow out of rock," he said. Clara didn't flinch. "Still squeezing blood from the poor?" He chuckled. Sharp tongue, as always. Carl leaned in slightly, voice lowering. "I came to talk, Clara, about the ranch, about your future. You don't have to keep bleeding out on this dirt. I could take that burden off you. Clean, legal. I'm not selling." "You will." He tipped his head toward the barn. "And you're letting a drifter sleep on your land now. What would the church ladies say?" Clara narrowed her eyes. "What they always say. Things that don't matter." Carl's smile faded, just a touch. "It's not wise to make enemies of men with ink and signatures. I've held back out of respect, but that won't last forever." From behind him, footsteps crunched on gravel. Bo appeared, slow and calm, wiping his hands with an oil-stained rag. He didn't look angry, didn't say a word. He just walked up beside Clara and stared at Carl like he was a stain on clean wood. Carl's eyes flicked between them. He cleared his throat, tugged at his collar. "I see. Well, you let me know if you come to your senses." He left without another word. Dust kicked up behind the buggy as it rolled away. Bo turned to Clara. "He does that often?" "Often enough." "You thinking about saying yes?" She looked at him, long and hard. "Would you?" Bo folded the rag, tucked it into his belt. "Man like that doesn't buy land. He buys control." They stood there a moment longer. Then Clara turned and walked back to the house without saying more. But that night she brought out 2 mugs instead of 1. Sunday came with clouds rolling low and slow over the hills. Church was quiet. Fewer faces showed than usual. Clara sat near the back with the girls, head held high. Bo stood in the corner by the door, hat in hand, boots dusted but clean. After the hymn, the whispers began. Clara could feel them, feel the eyes crawling across her spine like cold water. Widow Mayfield and the stranger. She didn't flinch, didn't hide. After the sermon, Miss Lavinia Bennett, oldest and sharpest tongue in town, approached with a tight smile. "Clara, dear, we've noticed you have a new helper." Clara smiled sweetly. "Better company than most." Bo appeared beside her then, calm as sunrise. "Morning, ma'am," he said. Miss Lavinia blinked, lips parting, but no words came. Bo nodded once and guided Clara and the girls out the door. The silence that followed them was louder than thunder. Back at the ranch, Bo spent the afternoon breaking a wild colt that had wandered into the back pasture. Ellie watched from the fence post, cheering softly. June sat cross-legged in the dirt, sketching the scene with a stick. Clara sat on the porch, one leg tucked beneath her, watching him. His shirt clung to his back, soaked with sweat, but he moved like he'd been born on a saddle. She watched the way he spoke to the horse, low and steady, never pushing harder than needed. It wasn't power that tamed the colt. It was presence. That night, the girls went to bed without fuss. Clara stayed outside, arms folded on the railing, staring out into the dark. The stars were clearer than they had been in weeks. Bo approached quietly, sat on the top step. "You thinking about that offer still?" he asked. "No." "Good." A pause settled between them, the kind that didn't need filling. Then Clara spoke, softer than usual. "You really want to marry someone like me?" He didn't turn, just looked out at the night. "I want to build something that outlives me." Clara exhaled. "I don't love you, I know. I don't know if I ever could." Bo nodded slowly. "I ain't asking for love. I'm asking for a place to be needed." She was quiet for a long moment. "I don't need saving," she whispered. Bo looked at her then. "Neither do I." The wind blew again, warmer this time. Clara stood, walked inside. When she returned, she carried a folded blanket and handed it to him. "Hayloft's yours again," she said, "but the door's unlocked." Bo looked up, and for the first time his eyes softened. "Thank you." She didn't answer, just turned and disappeared into the house. In the silence that followed, the old boards of the porch creaked gently, like they were finally breathing after holding too much weight. And above them, the sky stretched wide and deep, waiting. The next morning, Clara didn't knock before stepping into the hayloft. Her boots crunched soft against the straw, and the filtered light through the slats carved long golden shapes across the floor. Bo sat up slowly from his bedroll, blinking as though he hadn't slept much at all. "We'll marry by the end of the week," Clara said. Bo didn't respond right away. He pushed himself upright, reached for his shirt folded beside him, and gave her a long, searching look. "You sure?" She crossed her arms. "I'm sure enough. Dobbins won't stop. I got nothing left to lose but this land, and I'd rather bleed into the dirt with my name than watch someone like him sign it away." Bo stood, pulling the shirt over his broad shoulders. "You said you didn't love me," Clara nodded. "Still don't. But you work harder than any man I've known, and you haven't asked me to change a thing. You help the girls without trying to be their father, and you don't talk down to me. That's more than I ever hoped for." He grabbed his hat and moved toward the ladder, pausing at the top. "I'll ride into town, talk to the preacher." Clara exhaled, her spine stiff but her eyes softer than usual. "No fuss, just us and the girls, and don't go bringing a ring." Bo tipped his head, wasn't planning on it. He was gone before breakfast. When he returned that evening, the sun dipped low, bathing the ranch in a haze of gold. The air smelled of sweat and horses, of rusted tools and earth. He handed Clara a small folded paper, an appointment with Reverend Kane on Saturday morning. Clara tucked it into her apron without looking at it. That night, she combed June's hair on the porch while Ellie practiced drawing imaginary horses in the dirt with a stick. Bo sat nearby, quiet as ever, sharpening an old blade with slow, deliberate strokes. June leaned back against her mother's leg. "Will we have to call him Pa?" Clara paused, fingers still for a moment. "You call him what you like, but he'll be part of this family now." Ellie didn't look up. "Even if he sleeps in the barn?" Bo stopped his sharpening. "Not anymore," he said quietly. The next few days passed in a blur of simple things that felt heavier than usual. Clara baked more than she needed the dough like it owed her something. Bo fixed the back gate, even though it hadn't squeaked in weeks. The girls washed their dresses without being told. Nobody said much about the wedding. It just hung in the air, unsaid, but undeniable. Saturday came hot and slow. They rode into town in the same wagon Clara used for hauling feed and firewood. The girls wore their best dresses, faded but clean, and Bo wore a fresh shirt tucked stiffly into dark trousers. Clara had braided her hair back, tight and simple, and wore the same dress she'd buried her husband in. It had been black then. It had faded to a dull gray now, just like her grief. Reverend Kane didn't ask for vows. Clara had told him not to. He just opened the old book, looked at each of them with weathered eyes, and read what he needed to read. "Do you, Bo Garrison, take Clara Mayfield as your lawful wife?" Bo didn't hesitate. "I do." "Do you, Clara Mayfield, take Bo Garrison?" "I do," she said before the sentence ended. Kane nodded. "Then by the eyes of God and the dust beneath our boots, you are husband and wife." There was no kiss. Clara turned toward the girls, reached for June's hand, and walked back toward the wagon. Bo followed without a word. The ride home was quiet. That night, Bo didn't go to the barn. He didn't ask. He just unrolled his bedroll at the far side of the main room, near the cold stove. Clara watched him from the kitchen table, one hand resting on the mug of coffee she didn't drink. "You don't have to sleep there," she said. Bo shrugged, "Not asking for anything you ain't ready to give." She stared at him for a long moment, then stood and walked past him, heading toward her bedroom. She left the door open. Days changed after that, but slowly. Bo began to take over some of the heavier work without being asked. He mended the water pump, dug a new trench behind the barn for runoff, and started training the mule to carry weight without kicking. The girls started calling him Bo instead of that man, and slowly, almost without noticing, Clara began to lean. It started with coffee. He'd hand her a cup before she asked. Then it was silence. He could sit with her for an hour without speaking, and it felt more like company than conversation ever had. Then it was touch, not passion, but presence. A hand on her back as she climbed the wagon, a shoulder brushing hers when they sat too close on the porch. Clara didn't talk about her late husband. Bo didn't ask. But one night, while they watched June sleep curled on the couch with a book open on her chest, she said softly, "He died during a cattle drive. Thunderstorms spooked the horses. He tried to cut the lead loose. Didn't make it." Bo nodded, eyes still on the girl. "You loved him?" "Not at first," Clara said. "But I did by the end." Bo leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Do you think you could love again?" "I don't know," she said, "but I think I'd regret not trying." They didn't say anything else that night. One evening, Clara found Bo outside carving a piece of wood. He sat on a stump beneath the dying sycamore, whittling slow, careful curls from the surface. She approached without speaking and watched the shape emerge. A bird, wings outstretched. "For June," he said without looking up. "She likes the ones that fly." Clara reached for it, turned it over in her palm. The detail was rough but intentional. Every cut felt like it belonged. "She'll love it." Bo set down the knife and leaned back. "She's like you, sharp but quiet." "She's too soft. Like Ellie, they need more than this place can give." Bo looked toward the horizon. "Then let's build something bigger." Clara sat beside him, letting her hand rest on her knee, just near enough to his without touching. "You think it's that easy?" "No," he said, "but I think it's worth trying." A storm rolled in 2 nights later, the kind that crawled over the land like an animal, slow and low, and full of warning. The sky turned the color of old bruises, and the wind tore through the trees with a howl. Clara raced to the barn, barefoot, her hair whipping behind her. Bo was already there, lashing down the stall doors, his shirt soaked through. "We need to move the feed bags!" she shouted. Together they hauled sacks through the mud, shoulders slick with rain, breath sharp in the cold. Thunder cracked overhead, and the girls watched from the house, pale faces framed by candlelight. When it was done, they collapsed under the awning, soaked and gasping. Bo leaned back against the wall, eyes closed, water dripping from his chin. "You always do this?" he asked. Clara laughed, a real laugh, sharp and sudden. "Every damn spring." He turned to her then, and for the first time, his hand reached for hers. She let him take it. They didn't kiss. Not that night, but something passed between them, an understanding, unspoken but solid as stone. Later, as they sat by the fire drying off, Ellie crept from her room with a blanket. She draped it over Bo's shoulders, then crawled into his lap without a word. He froze at first, then wrapped the blanket around her and rested his hand gently on her back. Clara watched from across the room, something thick in her throat. June came to her side, small fingers wrapping around hers. "You married him," June whispered, "but I think he married all of us." Clara didn't speak, just held her tighter. And outside, the rain washed the dust from Bitter Creek, at least for a little while. The sky had that strange color again, between rust and ash, when Clara saw the rider on the ridge. He wasn't close, not yet, just a dark shape against the setting sun, watching. Her hands tightened around the handle of the water bucket, the cold of the iron biting into her calluses. She didn't call for Bo. She didn't have to. By the time she turned toward the house, he was already at the porch, shotgun in hand, eyes locked on the horizon. "He's been up there 3 nights now," Bo said quietly. Clara set the bucket down. "Same man?" Bo nodded. "Same hat. Same horse. Looks like Dobbins finally found his nerve." They didn't speak of it often, but everyone knew Carl Dobbins wasn't finished. The marriage had stalled him, but not stopped him. Bo's name on the deed gave Clara breathing room, but Carl had other tricks. Men like him always did. Quiet signatures, judges in their pocket, folks too scared to say what they saw. 2 weeks earlier, a letter had come by courier. No return address, just fine black ink on thick paper, and the weight of legal language threatening to drown them both. It claimed improper registration, fraudulent transfer of ownership, cited dusty laws no one had invoked in decades. Clara had read it twice, her jaw clenched so tight it ached. "He's coming for the land," she had said. Bo had taken the letter, folded it neatly, and slid it into the drawer under the rifle shells. "Then we'll be ready." They doubled their chores after that. Bo spent his mornings reinforcing the fence lines, adding barbed wire and replacing rotted posts. Clara reorganized the shed, stacked supplies, labeled everything with chalk on old crates. The girls helped too. Ellie took to learning the layout of the property like she was preparing to defend it herself. June started sleeping in her boots. They weren't preparing for a war, but they weren't going to be caught on their heels either. A week passed. Then another rider showed. This one came closer. He wore a suit too clean for Bitter Creek, sat on a horse that looked bored rather than tired. He carried a rolled scroll and a smirk. Bo met him at the gate while Clara stayed by the barn, her hand close to the revolver holstered behind the feed trough. "I've come with notice," the rider said. "You've been summoned." Bo didn't take the scroll. "On what grounds?" "Violation of Deed Transfer Law 43A. Illegal consolidation of ranch property across county lines. The court expects you in town next Monday." Bo finally took it, unrolled the parchment slowly, eyes scanning the ink. When he looked up again, his face was unreadable. "I'll be there," he said. Then, with a calm that made the messenger swallow hard, he added, "And if you come back, bring someone who knows how to write truth." The rider turned fast, spurred his horse, and vanished down the path. Bo handed the scroll to Clara. "I've seen better forgeries on whiskey bottles." But Clara didn't laugh. "They'll come anyway," she said. "Legal or not." Bo nodded. "Then we call in favors." The next day, Bo rode out. He didn't say where he was going, just saddled his horse before dawn, packed a small roll, and left Clara with a map marked in red ink. "In case it gets bad before I return," he told her. "Hide the girls in the root cellar. I wired the latch. Pull hard and it'll lock from the inside. Don't come out till you hear my voice." Clara watched him ride off, heart thick in her chest. She spent the days alone with the girls, every sound louder than it ought to be. Ellie took over morning patrol, riding the east fence with her father's old spyglass. June stayed near the barn, helping Clara stack firewood and double-check the food stocks. At night, Clara slept near the front door, with the shotgun resting against her knee. She dreamed of hoofbeats, gunshots, the cry of wolves. Bo returned on the third evening with 4 men behind him. Each one was older, dirtier, harder than the last. Men with lines carved into their faces and weapons slung low and easy. They didn't ask questions, just nodded at Clara and got to work, checking blind spots, digging shallow posts in front of the porch, laying down sandbags behind the well wall. "These are friends?" Clara asked. Bo nodded. "Brothers, once, not by blood." The girls watched from the loft windows as the men moved like ghosts, securing the property with practiced hands. There was no panic in their movements, just readiness. That night, they all shared stew around the fire, silent for the most part. One of the men, Jericho, a half-creek tracker with a long scar down his neck, taught June how to make a rabbit snare with just a loop of wire and a steady hand. Clara pulled Bo aside as the stars came out. "You think it'll really come to this?" she asked. Bo looked up at the sky, then at her. "No man sends dogs unless he's ready to bite." She took a breath. "And we're ready." Bo didn't hesitate. "You've been ready longer than any of us." The next day was quiet. Too quiet. Even the winds seemed hesitant. Then, around noon, a single rider galloped into view. He didn't stop at the gate. He rode straight up to the porch, dismounted, and tossed a scroll at Bo's feet. "This is your last warning," he said. Bo picked it up. "From Dobbins?" "From the court." Bo raised an eyebrow. "Signed by the same judge Dobbins drinks with every Friday?" The rider swallowed. "He's coming at sunset, with men, with warrants." Clara stepped out then, rifle in hand. "Then he better be ready to bleed for it." The rider left without another word. They spent the afternoon loading weapons, boiling water, moving the girls into the root cellar with blankets and jars of pickled vegetables. Ellie resisted. June cried silently. Clara knelt and looked them both in the eye. "You come out only when Bo or I open that door. You hear gunfire, you stay down. You hear silence, you pray." The girls hugged her tightly. Then the door closed. Bo and his men took positions. Jericho by the barn, Clem behind the well wall, Amos and Lyle on the porch roof with rifles aimed toward the ridge. Bo stood by Clara at the front steps, calm as a man waiting for sunrise. They heard them before they saw them, hoofbeats. Many, maybe 10, maybe 15. And then the dust rose. Carl Dobbins rode at the front. Clean boots, polished buttons, smile, smug and stretched. Behind him were hired hands. Some local, some not. Guns slung over shoulders, hammers tucked into belts. They looked like men who had tasted easy money and wanted more. Bo stepped forward. "That's far enough." Carl didn't slow. "You're in violation of court order. This property is to be seized pending resolution." Clara raised her voice. "That paper's a lie." "Maybe," Carl said, "but it's a lie with a judge's signature." Jericho stepped out from behind the barn, rifle in hand. Carl's men shifted in their saddles. Bo leveled his shotgun. "You take one more step, you'll regret it." Carl sneered. "You gonna shoot a banker, Bo? In front of all these witnesses?" "I don't see a banker," Bo said. "I see a thief riding my land with a gang." There was a pause, a long one. The kind that stretches so thin it could break under a whisper. Then one of Carl's men nudged forward. A shot rang out. It came from above. Clem's rifle. The bullet struck the dirt inches from the horse's front hooves. The animal reared, whinnied, and the rider tumbled off, hitting the ground with a thud and a groan. Carl's smile disappeared. "You want blood," Bo said. "You better earn it." Carl looked around, at the men beside him, at the shooters above, at the woman on the porch with fire in her eyes and a barrel aimed at his heart. Then he turned. "You'll regret this," he spat. "Not as much as you will," Clara replied. They rode off, not fast, but not slow either. When the dust finally settled, Bo lowered his gun. Clara didn't. Not until every horse was gone and silence fell again. Then she sat down on the porch steps and wept, not out of fear or relief, but release. Her shoulders shook, fists clenched in her lap. Bo sat beside her, placed a hand on her back, and let her cry. When it was over, they walked to the root cellar and pulled open the door. June sprang out first, tears streaking her face, clinging to Clara like a vine. Ellie followed, blinking in the daylight, staring around as though the air itself had changed. Bo knelt, opened his arms, and Ellie didn't hesitate. That night, they ate in the quiet. Not silence. Quiet. Bo's men shared stories by the fire, and the girls leaned into their mother, finally unafraid. Clara reached for Bo's hand beneath the table. He didn't look at her, he just held it tight, warm and steady. The dust had stood still, and they were still standing. The morning after Dobbins retreated, the ranch didn't awaken in panic. It stirred gently. Like the land itself was exhaling for the first time in weeks. The sun rose slowly, without urgency, spilling gold across the hills and brushing the rooftops of Bitter Creek with the softest light it had offered in years. There was no shouting, no hammering, no galloping hooves or cracking rifle fire, just birdsong and the creak of the porch as Clara stepped out barefoot, mug in hand, to greet the peace she hadn't known how much she'd missed. She sat alone for a moment. The old wood beneath her still carried the chill of dawn. Then the door opened quietly behind her, and Bo stepped out, yawning, rubbing the back of his neck with the ease of a man who had earned the morning. He didn't say anything. He just sat beside her. She handed him his cup before he even reached for it. They drank in silence. Inside, the girls were still asleep on the floor near the hearth, curled beneath quilts that smelled of cedar and smoke. Jericho had left before sunrise, riding east to check on a cousin near the Colorado line. Clem, Amos, and Lyle had taken their leave not long after, leaving behind firm handshakes, quiet nods, and the unspoken understanding that their debts to Bo Garrison were repaid in full. Clara had cooked them breakfast before they left, and each man had tipped his hat to her like she was something sacred. Now, it was just the four of them again. Bo set his empty mug down on the railing. "You sleep?" Clara shook her head. "Didn't want to miss this." He followed her gaze. The pasture was damp from the night air, dew glistening along the tips of every blade. A few of the cattle had wandered closer to the fence, their slow movements lazy in the sun. The barn door was slightly ajar, just enough for morning light to spill inside and catch the dust floating in golden beams. "This place is quiet," Bo said. "It wasn't always," Clara replied. "When Tom was alive, there was laughter, girls running everywhere. I was younger. I thought I had time to be afraid." Bo didn't speak, but he looked at her in that way he had, steady, unflinching, as if waiting was part of the language. Clara ran a finger around the rim of her mug. "After he died, the world got smaller. My voice got softer. I let the fences fall apart. Not because I didn't care, because I thought the land was all I had left. I thought if I held on to it hard enough, I wouldn't feel everything else slipping away." She turned to him. "But you came in and didn't try to fix me. You just picked up a hammer and worked." Bo leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I've seen women wear grief like armor. But you wore it like a saddle. It bent you, but you kept riding." Clara chuckled, but it caught in her throat. "That's the most cowboy thing I've ever been told." He reached out, took her hand without asking. She didn't pull away. Inside the house, Ellie stirred. The sound of her sleepy footsteps padded toward the door. She stepped onto the porch, blanket wrapped around her shoulders, hair a tangled mess of dark curls. She blinked up at them, then sat between them without a word. Bo looked down at her. "You hungry?" She nodded. He stood, stretched, and walked inside. Clara and Ellie sat in the silence that followed. The girl leaned her head against her mother's arm. "He's staying, isn't he?" Clara ran her hand gently through Ellie's hair. "He's part of us now, if he wants to be." "I think he does," Ellie said. Later that day, Clara took the girls into town. They walked instead of riding. The trip took longer, but it gave them space to talk, to laugh again. The town was quiet, almost shy as they arrived. People watched from windows, from porches. Whispers followed them like shadows. Some smiled. Some didn't. At the general store, Clara picked up flour, sugar, a spool of thread, and a small tin of honey, something she hadn't allowed herself in over a year. Ellie chose a new notebook, and June picked out a small clay whistle shaped like a bird. The store clerk, Mr. Havens, rang them up with more warmth than usual, and when Clara offered payment, he waved her hand. "On the house," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Word is," he added softly, "you and Bo stood your ground. Some of us, we wish we'd been braver." Clara said nothing, but she met his eyes with something stronger than words. As they walked back through town, Miss Lavinia Bennet stopped them outside the church. "Clara," she said with her usual tight smile. "Miss Bennet, I heard about the incident." Clara said nothing. Miss Bennet's smile twitched. "You know, some women would have collapsed under that kind of pressure. But you didn't. Well, you reminded me of your mother." Clara blinked. "She had that same fire. Stubborn as sin, and twice as proud. She'd be proud of you." Then Miss Bennet walked off, cane tapping the stone street. Back at the ranch, Bo had fixed the broken hinge on the barn door and built a new shelf inside the pantry. When the girls ran up with their small treasures, he knelt to see them like they were priceless. June's whistle squealed proudly in his hands. Ellie's notebook was already half full of scrawled sketches of horses, guns, and what looked suspiciously like him. That evening, Clara cooked stew with fresh onion and garlic, boiled biscuits over the stove, and opened the tin of honey. They ate slow, laughing between mouthfuls. June talked with her mouth full, and Bo told a story about a coyote who stole his saddlebag in New Mexico. Ellie leaned into his side when the fire got low. Clara watched it all, her heart so full it ached. When the girls had gone to bed, Bo stayed behind, helping her dry the dishes. The oil lamp flickered, casting their shadows long and warm across the wall. "I thought I was meant to finish this life alone," she said. Bo handed her a plate. "You ain't finished yet." She turned toward him. "Neither are you." He stepped closer, brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For choosing this. For choosing us." Bo didn't speak. He kissed her instead. It wasn't rushed or desperate. It was steady, like the way he worked, the way he listened, the way he'd slowly carved his place into her life with patience instead of pressure. When the kiss ended, Clara smiled softly. "Guess this marriage finally earned its name." Bo chuckled, low and rough. Figured it was about time. That night they lay in bed together for the first time. No pretense, no barriers. Just skin and breath and truth. The house was quiet, except for the wind outside and the gentle creak of old beams, as if even the walls were settling into peace. In the following weeks, the ranch began to bloom again, not with flowers, but with rhythm. Bo and Clara shared the morning chores. The girls had lessons by the fire. They painted the fence, mended the roof, and marked new grazing land. Bo carved more birds for June, and Ellie started sketching every animal on the property. Clara planted squash and beans near the shed, and they began building a second chicken coop behind the barn. One morning, Ellie surprised them all. She stood by the porch, a wooden box in her hands, awkward and nervous. "I made something," she said. Inside the box were two small carvings, one of a woman holding a rifle, the other of a tall man with a wide hat and a gentle face. Between them stood two little girls, and a carved banner above read, "Mayfield Garrison Ranch." Bo lifted the carving carefully. "You did this?" Ellie nodded. "You're my pa now, right?" Bo swallowed hard. I'd be proud to be." Clara stepped forward, wrapped her arms around her daughter. June joined them, then Bo. They stood there in the sun, four souls welded together not by blood, but by choice. Later that evening, as the stars rose high above Bitter Creek, Clara and Bo sat together on the porch swing. She leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. "Think we'll ever get used to the quiet?" Bo smiled. "I don't want to. I want to remember what we fought for." She reached into her apron, pulled out the small carved bird Bo had made for June months ago. "It's strange," she said. "This little thing, it means more than most of the land I've held on to for years." Bo took it gently, set it on the windowsill beside them, then let it watch over us. The bird caught the moonlight just right. And in the distance, across the hills and the quiet grass, Bitter Creek rested, no longer dying, just beginning. In the end, it wasn't land or law that made the Mayfield Garrison Ranch thrive. It was choice, the choice to stand, to trust, to love again, even after everything had been taken. In a town where silence once meant surrender, Clara and Bo built something louder than words, a family born not from blood, but from courage, work, and quiet love. If this story moved your heart like it did ours, don't forget to saddle up and subscribe to Wild West Love Chronicles, where every tale brings you closer to the grit, romance, and timeless spirit of the frontier. Click subscribe now so you don't miss the next unforgettable story from the heart of the Wild West.